But today, I wanted to speak about something, a kind of faith that is really transcendent. I like that word, transcendent of our daily life. And it has to do with this notion of setting our faith compass to God. I found an old excerpt of a sermon that was given by Martin Luther. Martin Luther lived about 400 years ago. And in this excerpt, he talks about the kind of faith. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about that. He starts out his sermon by talking about the very shallow knowledge. People have a very shallow knowledge of faith, saying just, I believe in this, I believe in that. But then when the going gets rough, that belief just begins to erode away. No more belief. It's too tough. But then he goes on to describe a true faith. And I'll read this. He says, instead, faith is God's work in us that changes us and gives new birth from God. It kills the old Adam and makes us completely different people. It changes our hearts, our spirits, our thoughts, and all our powers. It brings the Holy Spirit with it. Yes, it is a living, creative, active, and powerful thing, this faith. Faith cannot help doing good works constantly. It doesn't stop to ask if good works ought to be done, but before anyone asks, it already has done them and continues to do them without ceasing. Faith is a living, bold trust in God's grace, so certain of God's favor that it would risk death 1,000 times trusting in it. Such confidence and knowledge of God's grace makes you happy. It makes you joyful and bold in your relationship to God and all creatures. The Holy Spirit makes this happen through faith. Because of it, you freely, willingly, and joyfully do good to everyone, serve everyone, suffer all kinds of things, love and praise the God who has shown you such grace. And in our faith, we've learned a kind of new terminology called absolute faith. This is something we've been trying to wrap our minds around for some time. This faith is an exercise in trying to completely separate ourselves from the fallen world, to become new people, new human beings. When he's talking about setting our faith compass, he's talking about applying our faith in a much more positive and meaningful way, fulfilling direction. God. Setting our sights on God. Giving up our attachments, giving up our worldly attachments, things we've considered to be normal in our lives. Doesn't mean we have to give up everything, but our attachment to it. Our kind of, thinking that that's all important. We have to set our priorities, what's really important. He says, when you have absolute faith in God, you don't exist in a way. You totally give yourself in faith. So that's why we see such verses like, he who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. It's not easy to think about that kind of faith, because we can't imagine the kind of sacrifice or the kind of investment that we have to put out. God made that kind of investment in the world. When God created this world, it was like giving everything, 100% of himself. And that's the kind of thing that we as offspring of God, we are also asked to give 100% of ourselves in creating ourself and also fulfilling the other two blessings, to multiply, to have dominion. And it's hard to imagine this, but when we think about it, faith is that mechanism that allows us to create. For us to be able to develop and do anything, we have to be able to imagine it. We have to be able to hope for it. We also have to be able to believe in it, have confidence in it. I was attending a small group meeting down in Los Angeles about 2 months ago. And it was a nice setting. We had about 8 or 9 people, and we were just sitting around talking about a certain topic for the evening. And one of the people that was attending made this remark about how difficult it was sometimes for our young people who have grown up in our faith to continue in our faith. And I thought about that in the setting that I was in there. I thought to myself, well, and I even voiced this opinion. And it seemed to me that the problem that we have is more with us. We need to have an idea in our own mind. What is the vision that we are trying to create? If we don't have clarity in our own mind, how can we expect anybody else to? And especially our children. In other words, how can our goal or our objective, how can that vision be real to them if it's not clear to us? We've got to really check ourselves. We have to make that vision our own. We create things by conceiving it in our mind first, then creating an image of it, then holding on to that image, and then projecting that image inward and also outward through our actions. It's like Martin Luther said, faith is a bold action. Faith is a verb. It's not just a belief. So, even in the secular world, star athletes, that are very successful, they have this, you ask any athlete, any successful athlete, what are they thinking about when they're crossing the finish line, when they make that slam dunk in basketball, when they're going over the goal line for a touchdown? What is the thing that gets them there? And they visualize that moment of success or victory. They visualize that in their mind, and they hold that image, and they project that image. I have a couple of videos at home of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan probably is, and ever shall be, the best basketball player ever. And I think most people would agree with that. And to see some of these things that he does with a basketball, leaping in the air and these incredible leaps that almost are like in slow motion, poetry in motion, and putting the basketball in the basket. And some people ask him, how in the world did you do that? And in the video, he talks about it a little bit. He says, I thought about it beforehand. I knew I was going to do that. Something that was in my mind. And I was able to take that shot. So beyond just separating ourselves from the fallen world, faith is an act. It's an act. It gives shape to that ideal that we have in our mind that's not yet a reality. Now recently we've been hearing phrases, a lot of things like, we are now entering the era of heaven. Or we are in the era of heaven. We're actually in the era after the coming of heaven. Okay, I knew it was something like that. And we are living in Chun-il-guk. This is a Korean term. If you don't know what it means, it's the nation of God. Actually, I think it means where the two become one. And that's an interesting point. I'll talk about that in a minute. We look around us and we see the reality of our world, and we wonder, are we really living in that era after the coming of heaven? Are we really there? Are we living in the nation of God? Are we experiencing it in our daily life? But this is the quality of Father's faith. We're striving for the kingdom of heaven, right? We're all on the path. That's why we're people of faith. That's why we say we're people